government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America? No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
Hello, and greetings the damned. Welcome to Bill Maher, Damn America. Welcome to Pod Damn America, the
Bill Maher podcast.
the Bill Maher, the goth Bill Maher socialist podcast.
He's going to start podcasting when it gets canceled. He's going to be like O'Reilly.
New rule, communism. Welcome to Pod Damn America, the goth socialist podcast for fuckheads. I'm Jake Flores. That's Anders Lee.
Anders Lee here.
That's Alex Maté.
I'm a Slav killer. That was my big thing.
This week we will be interviewing journalist Aaron Maté.
Like the soda, tea.
You've heard of yerba mate.
Well, check out Aaron Maté. You've heard of Elf on the Shelf. How about Aaron Maté on your yerba mate?
Reading his journalism will give you, it's like a caffeination situation.
But it's a comfortable, it's like a tea's caffeination.
Yeah, talking to that mic.
The other thing, too, yerba mate, Che Guevara's favorite drink.
Is that true?
Yes. From his native Argentina.
I didn't realize he was from Park Slope.
That's right, folks.
Folks.
You don't get that jaw structure unless you're the son of a doctor.
So we'll be talking to Aaron about Russiagate and the sort of lack of big payoff that, the big flop that was like the Mueller report this week. Very intelligent guy, had a very nuanced take on the whole thing, the narrative aspects of it, and the implications and how it's going to continue to fuck us. These are all things that people should be talking about. They're not on cable news. Your fucking crazy racist uncles and liberal wine moms and all sorts of people that are running society are not looking at these things. So, important interview. It's important that all these journalists are making this victory lap right now and gloating, rightfully so.
Why aren't
not
kids
enough
talking
gloating.
about this flop?
Huh?
Why aren't kids talking about this big flop?
Why aren't kids talking about this big flop?
They're on TikTok. They're lip syncing to the news. What are they doing out there?
I think that we definitely, as Aaron and Greenwald and all this sort of group of journalists that have circled around this and
All of our
correctly
friends.
assessed this situation have pointed out, we've wasted, not we, but a lot of people have wasted a lot of time and energy on what amounts to what it needs to be said. It's just a fucking conspiracy theory. My personal gripe with Russiagate is that if we were going to turn the news into a 24-hour coverage of a conspiracy theory, why not a more fun conspiracy theory, right? Sasquatch Gate. Trump is elected because of Sasquatch. That'd be cool,
Has anyone ever seen Donald Trump?
As anyone, he kind of looks a
He
little Sasquatchy.
does look like a Sasquatch.
How
looks
come
like-
every picture of Donald Trump, he looks so blurry?
How come he walks like that, huh? Those
doesn't-
swinging arms.
He has the large body, small limbs look of a Sasquatch.
Wait, there might be something to this.
Yeah,
he kind of stands like a Sasquatch.
Right.
Yes.
And
yes.
obviously the hair, the explanation might be that he has just a bad sense of style, but maybe his hair just does that and he can't get it down.
We know he has a problem with boundaries and that he has a problem with touching. Do you know who else has a problem with touching? The northwestern water ape. Taking whatever wanders into the woods in Seattle.
Wait, what's the northwestern water ape?
That's the Sasquatch.
Oh.
One of us at the table has done research on the Sasquatch.
I didn't know there was a name
because
for it.
there's also a Himalayan Yeti, which is the Southeast Asian water ape.
Himalayan. Oh, that's the Russia connection.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, fuck. It all comes back to Russia.
Yes.
Well, now I believe
it.
it.
Yes. And it's not pronounced Himalayan. I'm a native Himalayan.
It's Himalayan?
Yeah.
Like Somalian rhymes.
Yeah, I don't know if maybe that's just like the more direct translation if you say it with like kind of an Indian accent, which is something I would not do as an ally. But I think it is pronounced Himalayan, and there are Yetis there. Back to my main point.
Okay. Himalayan. All right. Himalayan.
Kind of.
I'm going to do a Def Jam comic for a second.
Okay.
Himalayan. That's the guy I buy my weed from. Himalayan. That's my sister's name.
Is that the guy you buy your Molly from?
Two on the nose.
You're edging around it. You're encircling the Sasquatch.
Yeah. I don't know. Okay.
The thing about Sasquatch, people are always looking for him, and they never quite find him. There are people who go out to kill Sasquatch. There are TV shows about people who spend all their time hunting Sasquatch, and they never get it. But how do you know it's not? I mean, if it's real, it's just a big animal, right?
Yeah, that's what.
It's not very exciting.
It's like a risk-reward thing, not panning out in your favor.
Something we were talking about on the premium episode is monsters and what our favorite monsters are. I always wondered, where does a monster just... Why is it not just an animal that hasn't been discovered yet? What makes it a monster?
I've had the same thought.
Yeah.
It's a pact with the devil.
Like, if you look at, like... If you watch the Discovery Channel for long enough, you'll see, like, crazy shit like that snakehead piranha thing that can
fish.
like grow fucking legs and swim to another
Yeah.
It's
to
an
another
invasive
lake.
species.
That's a monster.
Yeah.
It's just that it's already been identified
Right.
as an animal. So you're like, no, it's an animal. That's monsters. That's the same thing.
I think the traditional understanding is a pact with the devil and his terrible book.
But you can't prove.
Like a vampire is a monster.
If I had never seen a bat before, and then I saw a bat, I would make the assumption that's the devil
That's-
made that. You know, you can't prove it's not true.
The difference between a monster and a beast is a bit of book learning.
And Bigfoot has not been. He's not evil, right? He doesn't have a pact with the devil.
He's certainly not evil unless he is Donald Trump, sir.
I just imagine someone. This podcast is like half politics, half really dumb. Someone like turned to their friend onto the. You gotta listen to this smart, hard-hitting political show, Pod Damn America. And then the second they turn it on, is Anders going, "Bigfoot is not evil," as we have been led to believe.
There are many depictions of Bigfoot as a caring and a loving creature of the forest, but how do we know that those aren't produced by the same moneyed interests that gave us Donald Trump?
You know what Bigfoot hasn't done? Released his tax returns.
Where are Bigfoot's tax returns?
He's not even a Democrat.
Not a real Democrat. He's a wood ape.
I thought he was a water ape.
Whatever, man.
Well, speaking of
Not even fucking real.
speaking of Bill Maher, do you one of the only funny things Bill Maher has actually done is provoked Trump into suing him because he during the birther conspiracy wanted to get Trump's birth certificate to prove that he was not an orangutan.
Oh,
Got
wow.
him.
We just recreated an episode of Bill Maher.
Pod Damn America, Bill Maher podcast.
Dun, dun. But Trump
list.
sued him. Yeah, Trump sued him because Bill refused to accept the birth certificate as a joke. Because Trump, of course, went out of his way to get the birth certificate and show everybody. And then, I think he ended up dropping the lawsuit. His lawyer was just felt humiliated by it. But we should get that going with Sasquatch or Bigfoot. What's the difference?
Those two are synonymous.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh,
Sasquatch was also
words.
part of the Canadian X-Men, I believe. X-Men North or whatever it was.
I think you're thinking of
Canadian X-Men.
whoa.
Great Lakes Avengers. That's right.
What's
Yeah.
the Native American
Are any of these real or are you
Wendigo.
making these up?
Wendigo.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the Wendigo?
Shapeshifter.
Is that from the Marvel Universe?
It's
Supernatural season 1.
It's I think it's a Native American what do you call it? Crypto.
No, cryptid.
It's
Cryptid.
like Bitcoin, but for Native Americans.
It's cryptid. Yeah, cryptid currency. Bigfoot coins. Big coin. You meet Bigfoot in the woods, and he's like, I got an idea. I need investors. It's called Bitcoin. It's a cryptid currency that I invented.
Every time you take a picture of the currency, it's blurry.
Stormy Daniels.
This is why he lives in the woods, because no one wants to talk to him about his cryptocurrency. Oh, that's so fucking stupid.
Oh, yeah. I don't think we've recorded a single intro for a smart interview that's matched the interview in any way.
No. Well, I feel like we kind of have to make... I feel some responsibility to, if we make a really smart episode, to counterbalance it with a really dumb intro.
Yeah, like putting like a heavy rock in a sling or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Pod Damn America,
That's
it's
what
like
makes the machine
it's the woman holding the two scales, and one of them is full of dumb shit like this, and then the other one is full of juicy facts for your brain.
Right. And then you eat the scales.
Hell yeah.
You know what? I thought I had a big breakthrough earlier by saying that I was a Slav killer, like a Slavic Dracula, and that was, our fear of Putin in Russia, and it was going to be a great tie into the episode and our goth theme. But then now that I've been thinking about it quietly for 10 minutes to myself, Dracula's already...
I was going to say...
He's already from there.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to admit that.
Dracula, yeah, actually, he could be involved in Russiagate.
That's what's been missing from the liberal onslaught so far is, Putin, he's a hitman, he's a liar, he's a deceiver.
He drinks blood.
He sleeps in a coffin, he can't be out in the day. Where are these hard-hitting propaganda tools?
Russiagate ends with like how like people have lost their minds because of Russiagate. Like you just used to have a relative that was kind of just talked about TV shows they liked, and now you log onto Facebook and it's just like this wall of text that starts with like, okay, so in 1992 the dossier was handed from this person to this person. They go fucking crazy with like James Bond shit. That person eventually, when they figure out that Putin in the narrative of Russiagate is Count Dracula and lives in a tower somewhere, they become Van Helsing, right? And they ride to the tower with like a fucking weird Castlevania whip chain thing and a crossbow.
With like water in it and some shit. That was the stupidest weapons.
And there's a guy in at a gate who warns him not to go up, and he goes up anyway, and then he attempts to fight Vladimir Putin by killing him the only way he can be killed, which is by, I guess, by stabbing him through the heart with like a printout of like a long Facebook post that says butter emails or something.
Yes. He hates that. I'm having fun imagining in this narrative the Bernie bro, useful idiot in the Dracula story spreading around. You know who he is. He's
Igor, right?
He's Igor. Yeah. He's in the village and you don't know he's working for the other side, but he's like, ha ha, Hillary Clinton's an imperfect candidate.
Yeah. Oh, Igor. Let the women talk, Igor.
Well, apparently Mueller, on Sunday after the thing was dropped, he went on a little walk by the White House, which people are speculating about. But you know what I think would have made it even better is if he had the Van Helsing hat. Kind of tipped it to the
Van
White House.
Helsing hat will improve most walks. Yeah. We are now selling Pod Damn America Van Helsing hats.
Yeah, we're selling Van Helsing hats and custom contact lenses. And no shirts. Oh, man.
I'm getting into the contact lens game.
All right. So I think we should probably...
With all that aside...
we should probably swing into our episode, our full-length interview with Aaron Maté. Enjoy. Aaron Maté dropping some knowledge on you about Russiagate and how it's bullshit.
Eat your content vegetables.
old time. In the old times it was not a crime.
What are you talking
In the
about?
old time, in the old time. In the old times it was not a crime.
All right, we are joined today by the controversial journalist Aaron Maté. Thank you for calling in, Aaron.
Thanks for calling me controversial.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
Disgraced journalist Aaron Maté.
I've been dreaming of a day where I get to be called controversial, so I thought I'd bestow that honor on you. But we're talking today about like something that we really have not gotten into that much on the show, the Russiagate scandal. Like it's I mean, one of the reasons I never really cared that much about it is because, like, let's assume it's all true. Doesn't really change that much for me. Like the best possible outcome for any of this is President Pence. So that's just kind of been my angle on it. And it's like also a very complicated series of theories about what may have happened with Putin, to the point where it's like the spy novel, as you pointed out. Like I have trouble following spy novels. I have trouble following complicated movie plots, so I just have kind of avoided it. But for listeners like me, I guess, what is Russiagate? What was the theory, and what did the Mueller report reveal?
Well, first of all, I don't blame you for ignoring it because, as I've been saying from the get-go, the evidentiary basis for it was not there. And in the process, the fixation over it was sidelining much more important issues, I would say existential issues. But what Russiagate basically is this: it's a conspiracy theory. It's this notion that originated in the summer of 2016 that Donald Trump was working with the Russians in some sort of illicit conspiracy. That allegation was made in the Steele dossier, which is a piece of opposition research that was paid for by the Democratic Party. And it was also the subject of a counterintelligence investigation that was opened up by the FBI in July of 2016 on the basis of a very vague tip. So based on a very vague tip, the FBI opened up a counterintelligence probe of the Trump campaign and whether or not it had ties to Russia. And it resulted in being this 2-year fixation after Donald Trump won, because nobody expected him to. But after Hillary Clinton's crushing defeat, her aides immediately decided that Russia was going to be the one of the culprits, along with James Comey, who they were going to blame for their loss. And that helped lead us to this 2-year-long fixation where Democratic elites like them and their partisans on cable news and many people in the establishment media, as well as, of course, people in Congress, especially Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell and others, promoted this idea of Trump and Russia being in cahoots. And the special counsel that was appointed to investigate this, Robert Mueller, has just come back with his report. He submitted it. And according to the findings, a summary of the findings by Attorney General Barr, Mueller, to the surprise of none of us who followed the actual evidence and the actual developments, Mueller found that there was no basis for a Trump-Russia conspiracy.
Okay, so it's a big nothing burger, as you've pointed out. What do you say to some critics on the left that say, like, obviously this isn't going to amount to anything, so why even bother trying to debunk it? You know, what the outlets like MSNBC, the New York Times, it's not like they're going to be reporting on substantive, consequential issues anyway. It's going to be, they're going to be repeating sort of U.S. imperialist talking points anyway. So why even go out of your way to debunk this?
I agree that they're not going to be covering serious issues anyway, but, the argument that those of us on the left should just ignore it and let it die on its own, I mean, I can get that. I mean, it's like, and I don't fault anybody for not focusing on it. But in my case, I mean, I'm a journalist, which is a little bit different from, well, I'd say it's actually very different from being a partisan activist. I mean, if you're a journalist, you're just supposed to follow the facts. And meanwhile, incidentally, as a leftist, and I don't hide the fact that I am, I think Russiagate had horrible consequences for the left, because for example, looking at the Democrats, for example, what did it let the Democratic elite do? It helped them avoid the reckoning that should have happened after losing an election to Donald J. Trump. I think the most humiliating election loss in U.S. history. And it allowed them to avoid confronting their own failures, and which I think you cannot separate from their own failed neoliberal policies that so many Trump voters were duped into rebelling against. So basically, whereas I think Trump's victory should have led Democratic elites to say, geez, what did we do wrong here? And the party overall to say, what lessons can we draw? And maybe we should start challenging the corporate interests that our party is aligned with. It allowed them to basically put all that off by blaming Russia for their own failure. And in the process, tainting people on the left who challenged the Cold War consensus as being Russian dupes. And so Jill Stein, for example, however you feel about Jill Stein, she was investigated by the Senate Intelligence Committee for collusion with Russia. And of course, she was painted as a Kremlin stooge. Bernie Sanders, he was constantly, because they could point to the fact that some Russian social media bots might have retweeted some things that said Bernie Sanders in it. That was pointed as an example of Bernie Sanders being boosted by Russia. So I think this thing was horribly consequential for the left. And of course, having mentioned the fact that the fixation on this overshadowed a discussion and sidelined, a discussion of Trump's actual policies. And it kind of undercut, I think, the potential to organize around those issues. Because if you look at, some of the biggest protests of the Trump era, initially we had people go out to airports, right, in droves to oppose the Muslim ban. But that was very early on in the Trump presidency. And I think you can I can't prove this obviously, but I think you can make a strong correlation between the decline in activism after that and the rise of Russiagate, because so much of liberal left energy was channeled into this notion that Trump was a Russian conspirator and that Robert Mueller was going to uncover it. And that is why one of the biggest protests of the Trump era was not about the tax cuts, this massive upward transfer of wealth, not about Trump's assault on healthcare, but about saving the job of Jeff Sessions.
Yeah.
Jeff Berger. So the day after Jeff Sessions was fired, there was this massive, protect Mueller event across the country, in Times Square, in D.C., everywhere. Bigger protests for saving Jeff Sessions' job than for saving healthcare and for stopping the tax cuts. I mean, so to say that there weren't consequences here for the left, I think is missing all of these serious consequences that Russiagate caused.
Yeah, and I think your argument might be someone has got to do it. Someone's got to point this out and actually go through the argument for why this isn't this is a conspiracy theory. But what have some of the professional repercussions been for you for having this argument?
Well, there's people whose work I have respected in the past who have taken shots at me both in subtweets and direct tweets. But I mean, who cares?
Jen Kirkman. I'm just kidding.
I actually used to really find Jen Kirkman's comedy when I was kind of like a comedy nerd. I thought she was really funny. And
the most infuriating thing about her post-Trump psychosis is that she was a good comic. She had chops, man.
Look at Stephen Colbert.
Yeah.
I mean anybody who grew up who was there for the era of the Colbert Report, it's hard to watch. It's that's one. I'm not the first person to point this out, that the Trump era has ruined comedy. It's not as if SNL was good beforehand, but SNL now is even more unwatchable than it was before Trump came along. And you can say that, I think, unfortunately, across the board. One more consequence, by the way, of I think Russiagate. So the professional consequences. I certainly watched in awe as many people who I respect went along with this. People at The Intercept, people at Democracy Now!, where I worked there for 10 years and I was a big part of that show. They went along with it. Colleagues of mine at The Nation magazine. I could go on and on and on. So, and in terms of professional consequences, I have suffered some, but it's who cares? It's either when you do something that goes against, the conventional narrative, you have to be prepared for all consequences. And now with the fact that the conspiracy theory that I was warning about for 2 years would not pan out, and that in fact would hand Trump a massive gift because it would allow him to claim he was vindicated. I wear all the disdain that I've received as a badge of honor.
Before I forget, I should do a little professional disclosure. My girlfriend does work for the Russian government. She is on RT's America's Comedy Show. We are in a romantic relationship. She is my girlfriend.
Thank you for filing that officially.
I got to make sure people know that.
Legally, he has to say that.
Yes.
You could get fired from this podcast.
If the tax company finds out your girlfriend works for a Russian TV show, we could be in jail.
I have no doubt that my that piece of information is going to end up in a article on a prominent liberal site one day about me, that Maté went on a show with ties to the Russian government's comedy the comedy part of the Russian government's intelligence operation to fool Americans via jokes.
Maté appeared on a podcast that was honeypotted by Russian fucking
exactly right.
whatever.
Just make sure they stipulate the connection that it is my girlfriend.
Maté engaged in hilarious measures.
Oh man.
But like any conspiracy theory, now we are seeing people are not gonna let this go. What are some of the things they are clinging to? The left, like the liberals, the Jen Kirkmans of the world. Like, what are they not happy about with the Mueller report?
Well, first of all, there's the question of, is there a cover-up? So is Attorney General William Barr, is he misrepresenting the contents of Mueller's actual report, even though Barr even has already directly quoted Mueller? And they're trying to use the fact that the full report hasn't been released yet as sort of like a branch to hold on to, is that maybe the report contains the conspiracy that they all believe in, even though, of course, Mueller says he found no conspiracy, and Mueller issued no indictments over that conspiracy. So, I'm all for releasing the report, and that's become their new rallying cry. But I just think, like everything else, they're in for a disappointment. And we saw, Joy Reid on MSNBC say that the seeds of a cover-up are there, and that will, so that's just basically them coming up with a new conspiracy theory to cover up for the failure of the initial one. And we're also seeing claims that, maybe Mueller found stuff that it really is damning, but he just couldn't charge. Well, I just find that hard to believe, that if Mueller found evidence that there was illicit ties between Trump and Russia, that he would sit on that for 2 years, or however long he's been doing this for, and he wouldn't issue any indictments for it. And also note that he also didn't issue any indictments for anyone who was interviewed about so many of the key pillars of the Trump-Russia conspiracy theory. So this June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, most of the key participants were interviewed, including Don Jr. and this kooky publicist Rob Goldstone, who wrote the email that everybody cites. And none of them were indicted for lying. And you think if there was a conspiracy to cover up, that Mueller, with all his powers, probably could have figured it out and at least gotten somebody on lying. But he didn't. And if you look at what we know about that meeting, it's not hard to see why. It's because this email that everybody cites, where Don Jr. said, "I love it," after he was told that the Russian government wants to help Donald Trump, it was written by a publicist, this guy Rob Goldstone, who now says, "I had no idea what I was talking about, and I was just basically using publicist puff to get the meeting for his client," who was like a mutual friend of his and Donald Trump Jr.'s, who's like a Russian pop star, the son of a billionaire who was friends with Donald Trump. So this whole thing was silly. It was based on kooky characters like this, and it was only turned into a huge, massive deal is because privileged people in media and politics, ignored the countervailing evidence. It was profitable for them to push it, to hype it up. It was good for MSNBC's ratings. It was good for failed Democratic elites to keep promoting this. But it was awful for everybody else. And it's especially awful now because they just handed Donald Trump, as some of us have been warning for 2 years, a massive gift for his reelection. And that's why I don't just call these people Russiagate peddlers or conspiracy theorists. I also call them Trump reelection gift wrappers.
Just speaking in terms of this as like a narrative and sort of like a psychosis thing, something that's kind of occurred to me recently is that it is kind of oddly similar to the birtherism of sort of Fox News chuds around Obama during the Obama era, in that it, as dumb as it is, it created a narrative that sort of like got them off the hook and let them stop thinking about anything else in any other way of, organizing or addressing their own problems or whatever. It's created like a fantasy where, well, that person didn't actually get elected, therefore this didn't all happen or whatever. And when you look at the way that they've sort of, gotten accustomed to like moving the goalposts every time a new development happens that proves this is probably not really a thing, this Russiagate thing probably didn't really happen, I think it makes it all the more apparent what this whole narrative is motivated by. Because this Barr thing happens and all of a sudden liberals are saying, well, you can't trust this Barr guy, you can't trust these people that are conducting this investigation. But I mean, I think like counterfactually, let's say the investigation proved collusion. Well, then would they also be saying, well, you can't trust these people? I mean, it's clearly, dependent on whatever they already want to be true, whatever the confirmation bias is there, I don't know.
Yeah.
So
I think that the analogy there to the birther movement is very apt for the reasons you describe, and also the xenophobic aspect, because this whole thing has been, partly predicated on some really vile Russophobia. The Russians, according to James Clapper, are genetically predisposed to lying. Seriously, that's a serious quote. I mean, we're hearing constantly about how the Russians are this mortal threat to us. Russian social media posts are equivalent to Pearl Harbor and 9/11. I mean, it's almost like there's so many aspects to it that are just all part of this, like the biggest outbreak of collective liberal self-delusion that I've ever seen. I mean, way worse than I remember the Iraq War being. It's really strange, and it's going to have to be grappled with. And people like, there's this woman, Maria Butina, who is like she has some weird views. She's very pro-gun and really wants to bring guns to Russia. But basically, because she committed the crime of being in the U.S. with a Russian passport, and got herself like caught up in like Republican circles where she was trying to pursue her gun agenda, she got accused of being totally baselessly a Russian spy.
I remember this, yeah.
Smeared as a honeypot, put in solitary confinement. Prosecutors ended up retracting all their most salacious claims, but by then everybody had smeared her and wondered if she was key to this, to this Trump-Russia conspiracy. And she's still in prison right now, and she's awaiting release and deportation. So it's been, and we have articles in the Washington Post and New York Times scrutinizing literally how many times a Trump associate or someone who knows a Trump associate interacted with someone who has a Russian passport or who might know someone with a Russian passport. I mean, it's insane, and it wouldn't exist if it wasn't Russia, because there's a Russophobic thing in this country that long predates Russiagate. It goes back decades, where Russia is blamed for all of our problems. Dr. Martin Luther King was, smeared as a dupe of the Soviets, and so this goes back many years. It's one facet of this really insane culture that we live in.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's been enough time passed between just plain old McCarthyism and the plain old Cold War Russophobia, and now that I think a lot of people who identify as liberals or whatever and think of themselves as leftist aren't even aware of how ironic it is that they are now taking the side of the FBI against someone like Martin Luther King in this sort of hysteria.
Yeah, and it's a traditionally right-wing sort of line, which is funny. Like, I mean, liberals keep doing that. They'll like take the right conservative argument and try to flip it around on Republicans, and it never works. Like we're seeing now, there are like guys at Trump rallies who wear T-shirts that say like Russian agent on them. Like this is never going to do anything.
The insidiousness of the entire thing, too, is it completely removes this angle of self-reflection the left and Democratic Party at large is supposed to be having this moment for right now after losing an embarrassing election to Donald Trump. And instead, you end up creating a narrative where Russia has somehow ruined your perfectly functioning democracy. And so, like, what is the end goal of that? We go to war with Russia? Like, what if you were right? There's nothing to be gained here.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. That's the whole point. There's only something to be gained by people in a privileged position. So it's good for your ratings if you're MSNBC. If you're a corporate channel that helped elect Trump by giving him billions of dollars worth of airtime, it's a great way not just to deflect from your own responsibility, but to keep in on the fun. I mean, like Les Moonves, the former chair of CBS before he was forced out for sexual harassment, he said that Trump has been great for us, and it's bring on the fun. So and if you're exactly as you say, it's been a way for failed Democrats to avoid reckoning with the failures of their own policies and to instead blame Russian social media posts and stolen emails. Let me read you an example. So, for example, David Axelrod, after these studies came out from commissioned by the Senate talking about the influence of Russian social media, David Axelrod said, when you consider the narrow margins by which Donald Trump won Michigan and Wisconsin and poor minority turnout there, these Russian voter suppression efforts may have been decisive. So Axelrod is saying that because people of color didn't turn out for Hillary in Michigan and Wisconsin, he's literally blaming Russian Facebook ads that not only nobody saw, but even if anybody did see them, they weren't even about the election, at least the vast majority of them, and they were also stupid and juvenile.
Yeah, we talked about it on the show once. There was like an Instagram account called like Black Utainment or something that had like 300 followers.
It's so stupid. Let me read you another quote. This is Hillary Clinton. She says, "The real question is, how did the Russians know how to target their message so precisely to undecided voters in Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania?" Quote. That's a literal quote from Hillary Clinton, the presidential candidate, blaming these stupid Russian social media posts for her loss in these key states, Wisconsin and Michigan, by the way, that she did not even campaign in.
Yeah. I think that you brought up something at the beginning of this whole interview that does not really get mentioned enough because it's such a obvious, this is where the fucking argument should start point. But this narrative was manufactured directly after the loss of the Clinton campaign to explain the loss of the Clinton campaign. You can follow the money there. It's not even a secret.
Yeah. Well, I'm very curious about this because not to get too off topic, but Aaron, your dad is a doctor and he writes a lot about mental health and studies that. I'm a big fan of his. What is his response to the Russiagate hysteria?
He thought it was all bullshit, and you'll have to ask him. I don't want to speak for him, but okay. He does have. I think he definitely had some very valuable insights into the psychology behind it, how those who peddled it preyed on the vulnerabilities of people who are rightfully traumatized by Trump's victory. And it was a convenient fantasy for many people. I mean, I don't blame anybody who's not in media or politics who bought into it because they were fed it constantly. And this was, if you trust your media, then this is what you're given, right? So listen, I actually would love to hear more about what he has to say about it, but I just don't want to speak for him.
Sure, that's fair.
Just to speak in psychological terms, I mean, it is very it's very, similar to the Roger Stoney sort of othering that Trump did of, Mexicans and Muslims and things like that. I mean, it's pretty simple. You just create a boogeyman that's the explanation for all of your constituency's problems so that they don't have to so they don't realize that the problem is actually you or just capitalism at large, et cetera, or whatever. I mean, they're not really reinventing the wheel by figuring out what confirms a lot of people's biases and what helps them sleep at night or whatever.
It is kind of fun. We get our own Alex Jones conspiracy theory, and you don't have to wonder why didn't Hillary Clinton go there. You just go, there were men in tracksuits spotted in Michigan polling places.
I mean, I keep beating this point to death, and it's really not that. It's pretty obvious, or it should be at least. But I mean, liberals we all laughed at Fox News people for so long. You had a racist uncle or something at Thanksgiving, you'd go, wow, this guy's lost his mind because of this cable news network. And now it's really ironic how how the shoe is on the other foot, or it's on both feet now, I guess.
We're all Fox News watchers.
Like, you know, liberals are no better than people that were driven insane by Fox News.
What does the Fox say? It says what the... God damn it.
Just like backing up for a second, what was the deal with Steve Cohen, or Michael Cohen, not Steve Cohen, and Manafort? What did they get indicted for, and how did that relate to the Mueller investigation, if at all?
Okay, so Paul Manafort is worth starting with because he is the Trump figure who is the only one who, or he faces the most prison time out of all of them so far. And he was indicted in a case that both judges in his trials in D.C. and Virginia acknowledge in court have nothing to do with the issue of Trump-Russia collusion. It basically, before he joined the Trump campaign, Manafort worked as a lobbyist in Ukraine. After a long career of being a shady lobbyist for all kinds of gangsters around the world, and basically Manafort was his case was a financial case. It was like an incredibly boring IRS income tax fraud and bank fraud case where he didn't report properly his income, and in applying for loans he like fudged information. So it was a combination of what I think Mueller prosecutors called garden variety and esoteric financial crimes. But so yeah, I mean, sure, I mean, by all means, hold this corrupt guy to account, put him in prison. But to put this at the center of like a story and then give it endless attention where Manafort's trial is like the biggest deal in the world, when again, it doesn't even have anything to do with the issue we're supposed to care about. Yeah. And so he was convicted and sentenced to he's facing, I think, 10 years in prison. One irony of his case is that, you know, it was used by Russiagate promoters to speculate about whether or not, you could tie Manafort's troubles to a Trump-Russia conspiracy, because the dominant narrative was that Manafort was doing Putin's bidding when he was in Ukraine, trying to because Ukraine has been a source of real tension between the U.S. and Russia for many years now. And so because Manafort was working for Viktor Yanukovych, this president whose party was affiliated historically with Russia, it was just widely assumed, and also because Manafort owed some money to some Russian oligarchs and was hired by them, it was widely assumed that Manafort was closely tied to the Kremlin. In reality, the opposite is the case. There's a article on the web by a guy named Graham Stack, who worked for Fusion GPS, the same firm behind the Steele dossier, where he basically points out that the media got the Manafort story all wrong. He was not pursuing Russian interests in Ukraine. He was actually trying to push his client Yanukovych away from Russia and to sign a trade agreement with the EU, which the U.S. was also supporting, and which ended up helping trigger this new round of confrontation between the U.S. and Russia over Ukraine. And so when it comes to the huge issue in Ukraine involving Russia, Manafort was actually on the pro-Western side. But all that's one of the things that have gotten ignored in the Trump-Russia madness. So basically on MSNBC, they would never acknowledge that. In the case of Michael Cohen, he faces prison time as well. And he's been sentenced, but the bulk of his case has to do with hush money payments over Stormy Daniels, right? And that came in part from Mueller, because Mueller referred his case to the Southern District of New York. But there's nothing there about a Trump-Russia conspiracy. The Russia angle comes with Cohen lying to Congress about his contacts and his efforts to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, and that's another case where this was treated as a huge pillar of the conspiracy theory. But if you look at the actual facts, they undermine the conspiracy theory because, A, this Trump Tower Moscow never came anywhere near getting off the ground. All the Trump organization did was sign a non-binding letter of intent. No money ever changed hands. No financing was ever secured. No Russian government approval was ever secured. Cohen's only contact with the Russian government was basically him calling the Kremlin press office, them calling him back and saying that they couldn't help him out. Sorry. And so if anything, that's another case where if Trump and Russia are in cahoots, then why does this deal go nowhere? And Cohen also says in his congressional testimony that Trump never expected to win the election and was using his campaign as a big branding opportunity, which makes perfect sense to me. And it makes perfect sense that helps explain why Trump was saying nice things about Vladimir Putin, is because he wanted to build this big Trump Tower in Moscow, which he even tweeted about a few years earlier. So yeah, like we know that Trump is a corrupt, shady individual, and that's, sure, I mean, no doubt, but that has not been the question of this 2-year fixation. The question was whether or not there was a conspiracy between him and Russia, and things like Manafort and Trump Tower only serve to undermine that.
Yeah. So the Mueller report so far has shown that there is not substantial evidence that there's collusion between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, but there is arguably some evidence for collusion with another foreign power, and that's the Israeli government. What is the case for Israelgate, I guess?
Israelgate is the only actual credible case that we know of so far when it comes to serious Trump collusion with the foreign government. Right after the election, Trump's victory, Michael Flynn, the incoming national security advisor, he made a series of phone calls to his Russian to the Russian ambassador at the time, Sergei Kislyak. And the very first order of business that Flynn undertook was calling Kislyak to ask him to veto a measure at the UN Security Council that Barack Obama had decided on his way out that he would let pass. And it was a measure basically criticizing Israeli settlement activity in the occupied territories. And Obama, for pretty much the first time of his presidency, had decided, now that he was in a position where he was leaving anyway, that he wasn't going to veto it after vetoing so many other measures critical of Israel before. And around that time, both Benjamin Netanyahu and Sheldon Adelson asked the Trump camp to do what they can to stop that measure from going through. So after that collusion, that was the Trump campaign's highest priority at the time, according to the Wall Street Journal. And Flynn tried to convince Kislyak to veto the measure. And in an act that further undermines the case for Trump and Russia being in cahoots, Russia ignored it, and that measure ended up passing at the UN. So that is the genesis of Israelgate. And then there's contacts between Israeli firms and the Trump camp, and offers of social media help. But it's like that thing at the UN is a documented case of collusion where at the world's highest international body, the UN Security Council, the Trump campaign tried to undermine the outgoing U.S. administration on its policy.
So now with Trump in office, if he is a Russian agent or asset, you would think he would want to ease tensions militarily, economically with Russia. Has that been the case, or has he inflamed them?
That is one unfortunate consequence of Russiagate, is that this drive to prove that Trump and Russia are in cahoots has de-incentivized those promoting that notion to acknowledge the incredibly scary developments that are happening before our eyes, where Trump and the people around him, especially after John Bolton came into his cabinet, are taking a series of reckless steps that are escalating tensions with the world's other nuclear power. Like, it can't get any more serious than this, but yet all this stuff gets ignored. So, for example, Trump bombed Russia's ally in Syria, Bashar al-Assad, twice, something that Obama never did. Trump is right now trying to overthrow Russia's ally in Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. Trump has torn up the INF Treaty, this pillar of international security. It's a vital arms control agreement. And then now basically setting off a whole new nuclear arms race. Trump is trying to stop a vital Russia-German gas pipeline, so much so that he's threatening sanctions against the pipeline. He's increased U.S. war games and troop presence on Russia's borders. And all this stuff has seriously escalated tensions between these two nuclear armed powers. But how often do we talk about that? How often is that focused on MSNBC or CNN? How much activism is there around that? I mean, literally, these things threaten human extinction, because it's not good to have increased spending on nuclear weapons, which, by the way, is what Trump is also doing. He's increased spending on nuclear weapons and the military. And if you look at his strategy documents, they say that, great power competition is now our number one priority. This was James Mattis, the adult in the room, saying this. And Russia and China are our biggest threats. So as we're worrying about whether or not Trump is taking orders from Putin, and we're mad that Trump says nice things about Putin in public, right in front of our eyes, Trump is pursuing incredibly reckless policies. Oh, by the way, including selling arms to Ukraine that Obama would not do, which is all the more ironic because one aspect of the conspiracy theory is that, like, it's alleged that the Trump campaign changed the RNC platform to, like, be soft on Russia, which is a huge misinterpretation of the actual facts. Even if it were true, it wouldn't matter because the RNC platform is useless. But this platform deals with sending weapons to Ukraine. And for all this talk about what happened with the platform, when Trump came to office, he sold the arms to Ukraine. And yet, for some reason, that doesn't disturb this idea that Trump is doing Putin's bidding. So it's just one more crazy aspect and one more scary development that resulted from this focus on Trump and Russia.
Yeah. And you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but Trump is already taking this up as, a campaign talking point against the Democrats in 2020. How do you think he's going to continue to do that, and how should the Democrats or the left push back against that?
Okay, I'm going to be a little bit corny. Okay,
Sure.
and I'm going to quote something that I wrote in April 2017, and I'm not saying this to gloat. But I'm really not. Like, I'm saying this because, this week where Mueller rejects the conspiracy theory is not a victory for anybody but Donald Trump. And that's something we've been, a small number of us who've been paying attention to this and writing about it have been warning about for 2 years. Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, Max Blumenthal, and others. So I wrote in The Intercept in April 2017, what if the allegations are ultimately disproved or go nowhere? And I'm talking about Rachel Maddow, but this applies to everybody who promoted it. Maddow and like-minded influential liberals will have led their audience on a fruitless quest, all the while helping foment anti-Russia sentiment, channeling Democratic Party energy away from productive self-critique, and diverting focus from the White House's actual policies. Trump would be handed a further gift via the damaged credibility of his enemy, the media responsible for holding him to account. So this is an outcome, I've been warning about for a long time. And I want to stress this because for a long time now, detractors, including people on the left, like Ryan Cooper, for example, whose work on domestic issues I otherwise respect, have said that we're defending Trump and we are somehow apologizing for him. But I think these people have it in reverse by promoting a conspiracy theory, putting so much energy into it, raising expectations that it would pan out. These people who bought into it have now handed Trump a massive re-election gift because now, after saying no collusion for 2 years, now he can claim actual legal vindication for it in the fact that Mueller did not allege collusion and basically found no collusion. So this is a huge gift for Trump that he will exploit. And, on top of that, I think people who were bought into Trump and Russia forgot that, this got excited by the idea of these investigations like Mueller's and Congress now in the House bringing Trump down. But they forgot that Republicans can launch investigations too. And unfortunately, when you look at the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation, I spoke about it a little bit earlier, but there was some shady stuff going on with the FBI in terms of their decisions to open up this investigation, to use the Steele dossier as evidence for getting a surveillance warrant. And I think Trump and his Republican allies in the Senate are going to use this now because they want revenge on their enemies. So they're going to launch an investigation. And I think unlike the Mueller probe, it's going to uncover actually damning stuff that Trump can then use to, bolster his claim of being, the subject of a witch hunt. And it's not, and I don't think these FBI people targeted Trump because they're woke and they, they care about his misogyny or his racism. They were alarmed that he was saying nice things about Vladimir Putin, and that basically conflicted with their Cold War, way of looking at the world. And so now we have this unfortunate situation that, as a result of paranoid actions and overzealous actions by intelligence officials that the broader liberal left trumpeted for 2 years. We're going to set that up for, I think, another gift by Trump to use as he heads into re-election, claiming both vindication and then also pointing to the fact that the deep state, as he will say, tried to bring him down.
Well, one of the more, I think, disturbing claims that's been made against Trump is that he's committed treason, which, legally speaking, and there's some dispute about whether we should use the legal or the popular definition of treason, but treason means acting with a foreign power that your country is at war with, and we're not, fingers crossed, currently at war with Russia. But what kind of precedent does that set, just being sort of casual about the T word, what kind of precedent does that set for like a Democratic president who might want to act in a diplomatic way with other countries that Republicans don't think we should be friendly to?
I think you've hit on a really important point, and that's one of the reasons why.
People don't say that often enough. I will say, I guess really do not.
Well, no, I mean, it's one of the reasons why, left Russiagate skeptics, especially Glenn Greenwald, I think, has made this point pretty tirelessly that, when you venerate intelligence officials like this, you're not just like, whether you think it's good for you now in terms of going after Trump, you're enabling them to do this in the future. And so exactly, we know from the New York Times and we know from Andrew McCabe that when the FBI opened up an additional investigation of whether or not Trump was compromised by Russia in May 2017, approximately, one of the predicates that they used was their concern that he was saying nice things about Vladimir Putin and that he wouldn't criticize Vladimir Putin. And Andrew McCabe has said that they found that strange. Peter Strzok, one of the FBI agents who investigated Trump, in the text messages that have come out of his, he talks about the Russians as all being, fucking liars. And Lisa Page, another FBI official, testified about the Russians being a threat to our way of life. And so basically, are we going to, as liberal, leftist, whatever we want to call ourselves, are we going to co-sign this precedent where we grant intelligence officials to investigate candidates who espouse foreign policy views that they don't like? So I don't know, like, what if Bernie Sanders comes out and endorses BDS? Or Bernie Sanders says that, I don't want to be overthrowing governments around the world. And I mean, whatever it is, like, it's an insane, like, you don't have to like Trump to be opposed to the kind of precedent that Russiagate has set for investigating political candidates for their political beliefs.
Right. It's like all the executive powers that everyone was really happy to allot onto Obama that then got transferred to Trump, like the DACA stuff and stuff like that. It's like look at the big picture. This is going to come back around and the gun's going to be pointing at you at some point,
Yeah. Exactly.
So are you going to keep keeping up with the Russiagates, this maniac, like whatever their latest thing is, or are you going to move on to a different story? What's your plan going forward?
I'm writing a book that is based on the idea that Trump's election, Russiagate, and this whole 2-year thing we've gone through is the result of a privilege protection racket, in which our politics
PPP.
are shaped. PPP. Our politics are shaped by a political media class who protect their privilege above all else. And that's why I think we got Donald Trump to begin with, is because he duped enough people into thinking that he would undo the neoliberal policies that destroyed so many people's lives. And that's why we got Russiagate, is because the same people responsible for those policies needed an excuse and needed a mechanism by which to sustain their own privilege, which, if they were serious about Donald Trump, they would rethink and they would start taking on the same corporate interests that they actually represent. So I'm working on that. And look, I mean, as long as especially there's no accountability from the media and political class, and they keep peddling the conspiracy theory and they keep deflecting. I mean, look, I'm on this beat. I do other things. When I was at the, I spent 10 years at Democracy Now! And most recently I was at The Real News, and I'm launching something else soon. And there I covered many issues, domestic and international. So, I mean, I've been accused by some people of just covering Russiagate, but they're forgetting all the work I've done elsewhere. It's true that at The Nation magazine, I've just written about Russiagate, but that's my beat there, and I make no apologies for it, especially given that everything that I warned about has, I think, borne out this week with Mueller rejecting the conspiracy theory that so many people believed in.
All right, Aaron Maté, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Aaron J. Maté.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on Pod Damn America.
Pod Damn America. I love that name, by the way.
Thank you so much.
I absolutely detest the podcast that inspired it. So I salute you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
All right.
All